Good evening, everyone. I thought I would let the bells die down a little bit, although I think they sound pretty good. I'm so happy to see a full house here tonight for this wonderful lecture. This is kind of the big finale for Catholic Studies for the semester, and we are really grateful for your presence at these lectures. This is the final lecture on the life of the Church this semester, and a special one at that, because our speaker is making a return engagement, having opened this topic 1 year ago in this very room. More about that in a moment, and a lot has happened. After tonight, we will look forward to welcoming you back on January 29th at 7 o'clock p.m. for the 2025 Bellarmine Lecture, this year featuring Professor Catherine Punsalan-Monlimos of Seattle University, who will speak about the role of Catholic and Jesuit schools in a lecture titled Contextual, Adaptive, and Catholic, a reflection for Jesuit education. Details for the entire spring season are posted on our social media accounts, and you can pick up a card with a link to those accounts at the table in back, and we also have a flyer on the table as well, in case you want to get those dates into your calendar tonight. My students, I'm talking to you. Thank you so much for being here. And before we turn to the lecture, I want to welcome you, those of us who are joining us online, and to invite you at any time during the lecture to tap the top of your screen to post a question. This will not be visible here in the hall. It won't interrupt anything. We will take some of these questions as we open the floor. I am now thoroughly delighted to welcome a well-known face, Emeritus Professor Paul Lakeland, to introduce tonight's speaker. Paul.
Thank you, Nancy. It's nice to be back. And it's great to be back to be welcoming or introducing my good friend, Professor Ospino. So this is, as Nancy said, his return visit, and this time he is delivering the 31st annual Christa F. Mooney Lecture in Theology, Religion, and Society. So you can tell last year he gave the 30th. This is the 31st. Father Mooney, for who this lecture is named, was academic vice president at Fairfield for a number of years and then professor of religious studies. He came to Fairfield in the year 1980, and he died rather young, unfortunately, in 1993. He was an internationally recognized theologian. He wrote a lot about the great Jesuit scholar, theologian, and paleontologist, Pierre Teilhard de Chardin. He wrote about religion and law, theology and science. Only a few of us at Fairfield now remember him, but those of us who do cherish his memory, and we know how pleased he would have been to see Professor Ospino here to give this lecture this evening. So Professor Ospino earned his doctorate in theology and education at Boston College, and currently he is Associate Professor of Theology and Religious Education in Boston College's School of Theology and Ministry. He's a great authority on Latino Catholic experience in the United States. He's had lots of awards. I'm going to mention 2 or 3. The Virgil Elizondo Award given by the Academy of Catholic Hispanic Theologians in the United States in 2018, for distinguished achievement in theology, and the Cardinal Cushing Medal for the Advancement of Church Research, awarded in 2021 by the Center for Applied Research in the Apostolate. Now, in the time since he was here last year, he has added another award, this time the 2024 Outstanding Contribution to Research in Catholic Education Award, presented by the Catholic Education Special Interest Group of the American Educational Research Association. You hear the repetition of that word, research? Well, his research is outstanding. He's authored 19 books and over 200 articles, book chapters, and essays, some in Spanish, some in English. Among his books are La Iglesia, Pueblo de Dios llamado a la comunión in 2018, and Called to Witness Hope, the Ministry of the Catechist, in 2023. He has served as president of the Academy of Catholic Hispanic Theologians in the United States, known by the acronym ACTUS, in 2021 to 2022. And since 2018, he has been secretary of the Catholic Theological Society of America, which is where I first met him. This, the largest professional association of theologians in the world, and let me tell you, the secretary works very hard. Last year, Professor Ospino ended his presentation with a list of ecclesiologies from different traditions that he thought could help us grow closer together in understanding. Today, a year later, and in what perhaps is a very different world, or about to be, he's going to follow this up by speaking on the topic, The American Catholic Experience 2024, Tensions That Test Our Communal Identity. So please join me in welcoming him back to Fairfield University.
Good evening, everyone. Well, what a pleasure to return to Fairfield University this year to deliver the 31st annual Christopher Mooney Lecture hosted by the university's Center for Catholic Studies. And I want to express my sincerest gratitude to Dr. Nancy Delaval, director of the center, for her invitation. This is a journey, as Paul was saying, that began last year when I delivered the 30th annual Christopher Mooney Lecture under the title, The American Catholic Experience, Lessons from Spaces in Creative Tension. This year, the lecture is titled The American Catholic Experience 2024, Tensions that Test Our Communal Identity. Dr. Delaval entrusted me with delivering these lectures consecutively, not only to provide continued reflection on the current state of Catholicism in the United States, but also as a way to take the pulse on how American Catholicism continues to find its way in a time of change, internally and externally, as it responds to social, political, global, and religious dynamics. Both lectures, last year's and this, take a closer look at the complexity that defines and redefines the American Catholic experience in our day. Both acknowledge that there are tensions that challenge our identity as Catholics and as citizens of this nation. The two lectures constitute what amounts to a contemporary ecclesiological reading of what it means to be a community of disciples engaged in processes of dying and being born again, resisting and embracing change, holding on to traditions that make us feel at home, and letting go of the same traditions as we journey as homeless pilgrims. I do not necessarily see these dyads as extreme opposites, although they point to different directions and distinct ways of being church, but as two sides of the same coin. To be American and Catholic is to live in tension. In last year's lecture, I reflected about old and new spaces in which we are being church in the United States. Ours is a church in transition at various levels, demographically, culturally, and even socioeconomically. There are many ways in which we are Catholic, some that have existed in this land for many decades, perhaps centuries, and others that come with the millions of immigrant Catholics who arrive in this nation every year. Other ways of being Catholic are being forged as the old and the new come together. It is in this interstitial space, the one where the old and the new coincide, the one where something new is emerging, that we discern what it means to be American and Catholic in our day. This year's lecture has two parts. One, the year 2024 and the idea of a Catholic communal identity. And two, lessons and opportunities to build church and society as American Catholics. I'm going to integrate some elements of synodal pedagogy into the reflection. After all, I'm a professor of religious education. Therefore, each part will be preceded by a question to reflect, followed by an invitation to share some thoughts with your neighbors. We will pause for a minute of prayer for silence. Then I will offer your thoughts. Some thoughts. Part 1, the year 2024 and the idea of Catholic communal identity. Let's begin with one question. In what ways was 2024 a year that challenged your Christian Catholic identity? In what ways was 2024 a year that challenged your Christian Catholic identity? Please turn to your neighbor and speak for about 2 or 3 minutes. Let us pause for 1 minute in silence, reflecting about what we just heard from our neighbors. There is no doubt that 2024 was a very interesting year for Catholics in the United States. Perhaps the two main public dynamics capturing the American Catholic imagination this year were the presidential election and the second session of the Synod on Synodality. They were not the only ones. Nonetheless, these two dynamics served as catalysts for many other conversations and reflections about Catholic identity. American Catholicism has long been a diverse experience that brings together a wide array of cultural, ideological, social, economic, and even religious perspectives. These many perspectives frequently meet, sometimes not in smooth ways, at homes, parishes, prayer groups, social media, etc. It seems like we need to start by dispelling the myth that there is such a thing as a Catholic vote or a Catholic unified voice on social and ethical issues or a community. While there are clear and specific convictions about faith and morals that the institutional church expects believers to embrace with Catholic faith, how such teachings are lived in the everyday often varies in light of political or ideological affiliation, socioeconomic location, and cultural, ethnic, and gender self-identification, among other variables. It is tempting to read tensions emerging from this diversity of perspectives as deep-seated and irreconcilable divisions. However, I want to propose that we read them instead as the natural interaction of differences within a shared ecology of ideas and convictions. Of course, differences, if taken to extremes or weaponized to hurt and exclude others, or used to advance particular interests that prevent expressions of the common good to flourish, can lead to painful divisions. The 2024 elections. The complex and evolving relationship between faith, political identity, and social values among American Catholics was significantly tested in the 2024 election. As one of the most significant religious voting blocs in the United States, Catholics, comprising about 21% of the US population, historically have played an active role on national politics. Catholics are not monolithic in our voting patterns. Catholic allegiances, whether politically or socially, have shifted over time, often mirroring broader national trends. The 2024 election brought to the fore how many Catholics do not seem to see eye to eye on issues such as abortion, social justice, immigration, economic policy, among others. Although Catholic teaching speaks with much clarity about these issues, drawing from the best of its intellectual, biblical, and spiritual traditions, American Catholics found a way to be publicly divided about them at the time of selecting a new government. The 2024 election highlighted significant differences across ethnic, generational, socioeconomic, and regional lines among Catholics. White Catholics continue to lean primarily Republican, while Black and Latino Catholics tend to support Democratic candidates. Nonetheless, more than a third of white Catholics support Democratic Party perspectives, and a growing number of Asian, Black, and Hispanic Catholics are increasingly identifying more closely with the Republican Party platform, especially as these groups seem to be concerned about the effects of economic policies that do not seem to serve well the middle and working classes, worry about inflation, and make important political decisions in light of family-centered values. Although most American Catholics across racial and socioeconomic subdivisions in principle reject abortion, thus aligning with official church teaching on the matter, there is a growing consensus across the board about the need to safeguard women's access to health care, including reproductive rights, not always defined in the same way by all groups, economic equity, respect for women's autonomy on questions related to sexual ethics, and the expansion of a safety net that protects all women and children, with particular attention to those who live in vulnerable socioeconomic conditions. Immigration has been a contentious issue throughout the history of the United States. This is not the first time that we debate who is allowed in this country or who needs to go. Catholic immigrants from Europe were received with much suspicion during the 19th and early 20th centuries. Today, the lives and rights of immigrants, particularly those who are Black and Hispanic, and those who are alternatively documented, have been thrusted into the political arena with mixed outcomes. The majority of immigrants, alternatively documented and most likely Catholic, the majority of immigrants, alternatively documented, are most likely, in their majority, Catholic. The winner of the 2024 presidential election ran on a campaign that scapegoated immigrants as invaders, criminals, and promised to set in motion the largest deportation effort in the history of this country. Bouts of nationalism, particularly white nationalism, xenophobia, racism, and aporophobia, meaning hatred and fear of the poor, permeate many conversations about immigration, practically forcing Catholics to ignore the social teachings of their own church and to assume attitudes or endorse politics that have little or nothing to do with the gospel. Pope Francis has consistently advocated for compassionate immigration policies, echoing a long tradition of Catholic support for people on the move. Yet, his message has not been fully embraced by all Catholics in this country, especially those who prioritize border security and stricter immigration laws. Differences among American Catholics during the 2024 election were exacerbated to the point of causing noticeable rifts in families, parishes, neighborhoods, groups, and regions. Our communion has been disrupted. Catholics are citizens, and as such, we participate in the various processes of discernment that test values, convictions, allegiances, and our shared understanding of society. Nonetheless, the 2024 election demonstrated that there are forces that thrive in division and manipulation that can lead Catholics place their religious identity aside and sometimes act against what their sisters and brothers in the faith would espouse as members of intentional faith communities. And this is a sign of concern. The Synod on Synodality. Someone recently asked me what I thought was one of the most significant effects of the conversation about synodality. Half jokingly, I answered, synodality made Catholicism interesting again. And regardless of how you understand it, it gave Catholics common language to talk to one another about the church in meaningful ways. Synodality is an invitation to contemplate the church as a community of people who listen to God's Holy Spirit in the voices of one another, discerning the signs of the times together, attempting to build communities of disciples that thrive in collaboration as we care for one another's salvation. Synodality means walking together. At the heart of this ecclesiological mark, there is a profound sense of communality. We are in this together. We must listen to the other person, because everyone has received the same Holy Spirit through the same baptism. And we must find ways to build faith communities where all are loved and included in the same way Jesus Christ loves and includes us in the experience of the reign of God's reign. From this perspective, what's not to like about synodality? Catholics in many parts of the world have embraced this ecclesiological vision with much joy and enthusiasm, remaining open to its possibilities. In Latin America, CELAM, the Latin American Episcopal Council, recently reorganized its entire structure and modes of operation and consultation according to a synodal ecclesiological vision. The Federation of Asian Bishops' Conferences, FABC, is currently making major inroads in embracing the spirit of synodality to envision a way of being church in the midst of the rich diversity of cultures and religious experiences that shape life in Asia. However, synodality for Catholics in the United States of America has become another test of our fragmented identity as we receive an invitation to walk together as one church amidst differences. The United States Conference of Catholic Bishops, USCCB, coordinated various efforts to invite Catholics at various levels of church life to engage in synodal consultations. About 1% of all Catholics in the country participated at some point in any of those conversations. What happened to the other 99%? Most Catholics would not be able to define the basic principles behind the idea of synodality or a synodal conversation anyway, much less name any of the worldwide processes or documents associated with a synod on synodality. However, one should not minimize the impact of some cultural factors that could be affecting the reception of synodality in the United States, other than just simply saying Catholics in the United States of America or bishops in the United States of America don't like Pope Francis. I will name 4. 1, the individualistic culture that permeates every aspect of American life, or most of them, has also made significant inroads in the lives of American Catholics. Thus, perceiving a process that is profoundly communal, almost as countercultural or antithetical to standard values. 2, much of the thrust towards accountability language, empowerment of the laity, collaboration among the clergy and the laity, and practices of consultation is very much ingrained in the already existing American Catholic ecclesiastical culture. Not in a perfect way, of course, but what many parts of the world aspire to incorporate in their ecclesial structures is already part of everyday life in Catholic communities and institutions in the United States of America. And we need to appreciate that. Many American Catholics, unfortunately, fail to see the novelty in the concept in conversations about synodality. 3, many, perhaps most American Catholics, approach their faith mainly as a private affair, largely lived at home or individually, and we seem content with embracing traditional teachings or engaging in practices that sustain our personal spirituality. Synodality not only expects more participation of Catholics in public life, or at least making the faith more public as we engage in the larger world, but also it calls for more commitment of the baptized to the regular affairs of the institutional church. In a live and let live cultural context, synodality may seem intrusive and perhaps burdensome. 4, secularism and the decline of religious institutional influence continue to make increasing inroads in the US society. Although Catholics may still present ourselves before the world as people guided by faith-based values and principles, the role of official religion in public square, the distrust of religious leaders and institutions, and the hermeneutics of suspicion applied to questions of belief, and even to the justification for religious institutions and traditions to exist, amount to discouragement to consider synodal engagement as something attractive or worth pursuing. Consequently, reception of synodality among American Catholics has been diverse, reflecting the complex landscapes of US Catholicism and its various theological, cultural, social, and ideological leanings. Perhaps we need to speak of multiple receptions of synodality in the American context. Labels always fall short from capturing full and complex realities. Yet, for the sake of argument, I will refer to 3 types of Catholics receiving synodality. More progressive Catholics seem more prone to welcome the idea of synodality. It represents an opportunity for the institutional church to be more responsive, inclusive, and relevant to contemporary challenges. Synodality is a means to address issues that have historically been sidelined, such as LGBTQ plus inclusion, role of women in decision-making in ecclesiastical roles, and social justice. From a more progressive perspective, synodality opens the door to discuss reforms at the level of structure, institution, practice, and potentially teachings. Moderate Catholics' views on synodality can range from hopeful about this potential to enhance pastoral care and inclusivity to cautious. From a moderate perspective, synodality fosters dialogue, which in turn is an opportunity to bridge divides within the ecclesial community. Yet, moderate Catholics warn about potential confusion about doctrinal convictions of roles, and most importantly, about keeping the communion intact. More conservative or traditional Catholics are skeptical about synodality, viewing the process and its theology as potential threats to the Church's unity and doctrinal integrity. These Catholics fear that those who espouse synodality may trigger changes in Church teaching, whether moral or doctrinal, and thus see it as a threat to timeless truths. The decentralized and consultative approach associated with synodality raises concerns about perceived erosion of hierarchical authority. Finally, transcending ideological labels, some American Catholics not only remain open to a synodal vision, but have a long tradition of implemented such vision in our processes of pastoral and ecclesial discernment. Such is the case of Hispanic Catholics and the National Encuentros of Hispanic Latino Ministry. The Black Catholic Symposium also reflects a synodal spirit and methodology. While many Catholics within these groups are by and large comfortable with synodal practices, unfortunately, they are not always in positions of ecclesial influence to lend their wisdom and experience to influence other sectors of American Catholic life. It is important to say, however, that Asian, Black, Hispanic, and Native American Catholics often embody organic cultural anthropologies that seem to favor the reception of the synodal vision. So where are you in the reception of synodality? Part 2, lessons and opportunities to build church and society as American Catholics. The question for you: what practice have you embraced to find spiritual peace as a Christian, as a Catholic person, during moments of social and ecclesial turmoil this year? What practice have you embraced to find spiritual peace as a Christian, as a Catholic person, during moments of social and ecclesial turmoil this year? Turn to your neighbor or choose a different neighbor and speak for about a minute and a half. Let us pause for a minute and reflect on what we just heard. What have we learned during 2024 and in most recent years as we contemplate the tensions that test our communal identity? I want to propose 3 lessons to take into consideration that at the same time offer us opportunities to build church and society as Americans and as Catholics. 1, American Catholics actually care about our society. Regardless of our differences, even when they are perceived as divisions, Catholics continue to demonstrate that we do care about the present and the future of this society. Remember, we constitute nearly 21% of the entire US population. Our diverse presence as white, Hispanic, Asian, Black, and Native Americans, as families and communities of mixed cultural backgrounds, is essential to the fabric of the US society. Catholics continue to make lasting contributions to the US society in areas like education through our universities, seminaries, schools, and institutes. Our hospitals and clinics are at the front lines of healthcare opportunities, especially at the service of those most underserved. Catholics continue to be the second largest provider of social services in the United States, only after the US government, through organizations such as Catholic Charities and the St. Vincent de Paul Society. Catholics are leaders in terms of advocacy for social justice issues, spearheading conversations about immigration and efforts related to immigration justice, workers' rights, and the care of creation. Catholics are committed to defending life from the time of conception to natural death. we care about the unborn and the most vulnerable. We tend to the sick and fight for access to health care for the most vulnerable. We protect the rights of those who cannot advocate for themselves, while advocating for those whose rights are being trampled. By paying attention to the 2024 election, I continue to confirm that Catholic social teaching is not necessarily a secret any longer. All the contrary, it is very much alive and present in our actions and in our prayers, in our commitments and in our sensibilities. Where we come short often is in the belief that there is only one way of being Catholic in order to build this nation. Hence the opportunity. We must work not to erase our differences, but together as a community of believers who know that journeying together will make us stronger as a nation without leaving anyone behind. 2, American Catholics actually care a lot about the church. This synodal process, or the synodal process, and in particularly the 2 sessions of the Synod on Synodality in 2023 and 2024, renewed among many the interest in discussing what it means to be Catholic. I believe that the conversations about synodality in recent years have moved us beyond from the still prevalent passive attitudes in which the majority of the laity tend to defer to the clergy or lay ecclesial ministers or professionals, teachers, catechists, and theologians, the responsibility to be concerned about the present and the future of our church. In other words, the synodal process has taken us from merely thinking with the church, meaning faithfulness, to thinking about the church, ecclesiological reflection, and dreaming the church, including its institutional dimensions, that we are ready to support and to which we are ready to commit in order to advance the mission of evangelization. And that points to participation. Glimpses of this love for the church are sufficiently clear in the U.S. National Synthesis document for the Diocesan Phase of the 2021-2023 Synod. In this document, 2024 now, since the Pope moved it, in this document, we see reflected many of the questions, proposals, dreams, and hopes of about 700,000 Catholics who participated in approximately 30,000 encounters and wrote more than 22,000 reports. That alone constitutes the largest process of consultation of Catholics in the history of Catholicism in this nation. The National Synthesis speaks of Catholic identity being grounded in the values of inclusivity, compassion, and communal participation. The Catholics who participated know that our faith is centered on the Eucharist and the rich sacramental life that sustain our spirituality as Christian disciples. To be Catholic, the document reminds us, is to recognize the pains and wounds of our community, many inflicted by some of our own members, hoping for healing. We are a wounded community that journeys through history with others who are wounded, and with them, we trust in the healing power of God. The synodal process revealed a community that longs for formation to understand and love more its own tradition, to serve others with a clear understanding of why we do what we do, and to grow as the body of Christ. The 5th National Encuentro of Hispanic Ministry in 2018, and the process that preceded it in the years leading to it, engaged more than 250,000 Catholics, most of them Hispanic, gathering, reflecting, and doing missionary work, building the church from their grassroots communities. All these instances show that show that American Catholics care deeply about our show that they care that we care deeply about our church. We learned this from the 1% that participated in these synodal processes. And yet, here is the opportunity. Catholics who have partaken of the synodal journey must become multipliers, companions along the way, joyful missionaries, witnesses of mercy in a fractured community, evangelizers to the rest of the 99%. 3, spaces to dialogue as Catholics are more urgent than ever. During 2024, we witnessed Catholics engaged in very passionate interactions about faith, values, society, politics, the church, family, neighbors, the present and the future, among many other themes. Many of those interactions occurred in the public square through social media, talk shows, interviews on television, radio, and podcasts. Some took place on the streets, while Catholics attended rallies, marched to support a cause, or found someone along the way and struck up a conversation. Such interactions often took the form of debates. I think that debates are important, and there is much to learn and grow when engaging in debates, but not the way our society seems to understand debate in the public square. Presidential and other political debates during the recent campaigns have been excruciating. Those engaged in the debate enter whatever the stage is, assuming that there is nothing to learn from the other or from others with whom they are debating. The other is the enemy. Debating has been largely reduced to personal attacks, to telling inaccuracies without regard for the truth or for what is good, to smearing the other person's reputation, to scoring points and winning at all costs in front of audiences that cheer callousness and partisanship. Public debates about politics or about the church, whether at home or in a hall or in a media venue, have become a spectacle that evokes, sometimes metaphorically, sometimes not, the cruelty exhibited at the amphitheaters of ancient times, where the dignity of the other and care for the common good were practically inexistent. Traveling throughout the United States, giving conferences or attending meetings, I found it interesting to hear questions like this. Raise your hand, quote, raise your hand if you or someone you know stopped talking to a relative or a friend because of political differences, close quote. Or, quote, raise your hand if you agree or disagree with Pope Francis and what's in the synodal process, close quote. I could hear the giggles. I could see the hesitation among some of the people who hear these questions, but sometimes it has become a badge of honor to raise your hand and declare that one doesn't talk to someone who is loved because of ideological or political differences, or because it is a sign of credibility in a very small circle that we inhabit to disagree with a bishop or the Pope. And I felt pain. 2024 revealed once again that Catholics want to engage in the public square with other Catholics and dialogue about themes, questions, and concerns that are important to all. But debating in the way just described will not foster communion. We need to learn how to dialogue first. In Fratelli Tutti, Pope Francis offers us some tips. The Pope says, authentic social dialogue involves the ability to respect the other's point of view and to admit that it may include legitimate convictions and concerns. Based on their identity and experience, others have a contribution to make, and it is desirable that they should articulate their positions for the sake of a more fruitful public debate. Public discussion, if it truly makes room for everyone and does not manipulate or conceal information, is a constant stimulus to a better grasp of the truth, or at least its more effective expression. It keeps different sectors from becoming complacent and self-centered in their own outlook and their limited concerns. Let us not forget, says the Pope, that differences are creative, they create tension, and in the resolution of tension lies humanity's progress. Number 203. Close quote. The various documents about synodality that have emerged in recent years also give us great insights about how Catholics, as people of faith, can dialogue in order to build ecclesial communion. In particular, I bring attention to the wonderful pedagogy that was used in many synodal interactions called conversations in the Spirit. The process is very simple. 1, you prepare yourself in personal prayer and reflection, studying some background documentation. 2, gather with others. You cannot have a debate on your own. You cannot have a conversation on your own. Gather with others and select a facilitator. 3, share briefly about what happened during the personal prayer time and as well as the fruits of one's prayer. No discussions or interactions at this point. 4, silence. 5, share what emerged during the time of silence after reflecting on what was heard. 6, silence again. Share what emerged during this time of silence after reflecting on what was heard this second time around. 8, offer a review, provide us a short report. Silence. The next question then, where does this dialogue happens then? The public spaces where some interactions are happening are not conducive to reflective interaction in a spirit of prayer. I think that this is where the opportunity rises. We need to recover the Catholic parish, the prayer group, the Catholic school, the university, the seminary, as spaces where Catholics can have constructive conversations. These cannot be spaces of division or polarization. If any of this has become a space of conflict, division, or broken communion, then it is time to renew their commitment to being Catholic spaces where Catholics and others can be together in a spirit of loving and respectful conversation, spaces where Catholics and others can listen to one another in a spirit that leads to journeying together, working for a better society and a better church. To conclude, my dear friends, this is a very exciting time to be Catholic in the United States of America. I don't know if you're excited. I am, no? The tensions that we experience in 2024, particularly the two discussed in this lecture, signal the dawn of a fresher way of being American and Catholic. There's much to learn from what we have experienced in the recent past and what we are learning from the new generations of Catholics in this country, particularly immigrants and young people. There is also much to leave behind as Catholics, particularly when the tensions that test our communal identity reveal that our ecclesial communion may be at risk or that our differences, when turned into divisions, will fail mightily at building the common good. There is a lot at stake. More so when many signs seem to be indicating that the second quarter of the 21st century will likely be defined by experiences that will call for Catholics in the United States and throughout the world to be courageously prophetic, faithful to the gospel, ambassadors of communion, and instruments of peace. As I said last year, we are invited to embrace this moment with open minds and hearts, trusting that God's grace, through the work of the Holy Spirit, will renew us and give us the wisdom to be faithful. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Professor Ospino. I have to say, when you called us to find a partner, to share, to talk aloud with whoever's on your right and then on your left, I actually found those were wonderful encounters, and I'm always nervous about that. I'm not naturally inclined to synodality. I'm a raging individualist. I want to sit in my own place. I want to text you, Don't call me, text, please. So that was good. And you gave us some time to kind of think about it afterward, which was very helpful. Mm-hmm. I also very much appreciated your suggestion of a move from sort of thinking with the church to the ecclesial moment to dreaming with the church. And I think that's something that we often don't feel like we can do. Mm-hmm. The question I would ask you is this. You're giving us a sort of a challenge to go find our spaces and to interact with one another in a synodal way. Given how thin the reception of synodality is on the ground in some places in the United States, in the church, how can a group in a parish feel any sense of resonance or receptivity from the U.S. church when it seems like it's kind of deafening silence at the top?
Thank you, Nancy, for this question. I think that I'm going to refer back to the lecture from last year in order to answer this, or at least to offer some thoughts. The question that you just asked about, okay, how does a group would feel, affirmed by the hierarchy or by whoever is in a position of authority, when this perhaps source of authority is not interested in doing that. It's very similar to what happens with ethnic communities in parishes, So you see Latino communities, Asian communities, immigrants from the Caribbean, from Africa, that formed, they live almost in isolation. They live almost in isolation because in their parishes they function as satellite communities, or they are not fully affirmed, And yet, that doesn't prevent them from getting together. And that would be my answer to this. If in your parish, if in your dioceses, you feel that there is no appetite on the part of the bishop or the chancery leaders or the pastor to engage in these conversations, there is nothing in the Code of Canon Law that says that Catholics cannot get together, They just can't. I would invite everyone to say, let's get together in a prayer group, a discussion group, As a matter of fact, that's what Jesus says, where 2 or 3 are gathered in my name, I'll be there, And I think that we need to lose the fear, as American Catholics, we need to lose the fear of getting together. This is something that I see happening naturally in usually the immigrant communities, the ethnic communities, but for Catholics, for many Catholics, especially who are born Euro-American, that there seems to be a desire for a commissioning or a desire for permission. And I think that we are at a time, synodality, through the Holy Spirit, empowers us, or the Holy Spirit, through synodality, empowers us not to ask permission.
I find that a very challenging response. I think that's very, don't wait for the bishop to pat you on the head, Nancy. Yeah. Go and gather with some people and ask questions. You have over 200,000 people gathering now for Encuentro, you said, in 2018. Did not wait for someone to say, this is how. You said, we know how.
Yeah,
we are a community.
The bishops called it, and they were part of it, but the community was going to do it anyway. So that's wonderful.
That's very helpful. Thank you. Do I have other questions out here? Questions from the floor?
Or thoughts.
Thoughts
could be, disagreements as well. That's, or...
Here we go.
Professor, I appreciated very much your speaking tonight about silence and the place of silence. In your explanation of the methodology of the synod, the conversations in the spirit, how there was a time to listen and to spend time in silence. And you gave us a couple of opportunities to do that here tonight. And it brings to mind something I just recently read. Silence is God's primary language. All others are poor translations.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you.
Another question here, please.
Hi, I'm Megan Perez. I was just wondering, do you think that some of the things that you were talking about will change, or do you think that the church will have a drastic change as the younger generation grows into adults in the future here?
Give me one example to illustrate one of the things. Which one do you think that could change?
Maybe how you were talking about Catholics' views on politics.
Catholics. Say that again. Catholics and politics. What was that?
Yeah, just at the beginning when you were talking about how how different Catholics reside with different political parties or stuff like that.
Personally, no. I don't think that that's going to change. As a matter of fact, it has never been the case. Throughout the history of Christianity, there are Catholics and Christians, have always taken positions on pretty much everything, I mean, there was, when you think of Tertullian or Origen or, Augustine or Aquinas, I mean, the difference is that today we don't exile each other or burn each other at the stake, but I mean, we're kind of in that sense, but there's always been difference. There's always been difference. Your question, thank you for asking it, because it invites me to say that on the one hand, the idea is not that one day we will all be in agreement in our politics or how we want to raise our families or how we want our hair do, even though I don't have any hair. But I think that the question is going to be, how do we honor differences? This nation, the United States of America, was established on the principle ut unum pluribus, one in the midst, in diversity. But for some reason, we just have fallen into the temptation of wanting to homogenize. We want everybody to speak English, or everybody to dress in one way, or everybody to pray in one particular way, But there are many ways of living the gospel, and I think that that's the growing edge for us as Catholics to avoid eventually, breaking the communion in profound ways. The other piece that I feel is that, and I want to just kind of echo something that I said in the lecture, and it's creating spaces for people who think differently to disagree in prayer and do it respectfully. I think that classrooms, university classrooms, are really good spaces. Your theology classes, I mean, most of your theology professors most likely will create those spaces. You can disagree. I was born in South America, and when I migrated to the United States as a graduate student, one of my first cultural shocks was that my professor told me, "You can disagree with me." I was shocked. I came from a culture in which you just don't disagree with authorities, period. That's it. You don't disagree with the professors. Whatever they say, you repeat it, you agree, and so on. You build upon that. But when I'm given that license to do that, it became freeing, and I think that that's, we need more spaces like that. Thank you.
Thank you. My students all agree with me, I'll just have you know. Other questions here? Professor Lakeland.
Thank you, Professor Ospina. A comment and then a question. The comment is a kind of shout out. When you were listing the various groups of people who have taken synodality very seriously, I wanted to add to that American Religious Sisters, and particularly the Leadership Conference, who've been doing this for decades and showing us not using the term, but actually practicing it. Now the question. when we go back to this picture of polarized Catholics, some more progressive, some more conservative, voting one way or the other, pretty much 50-50 divided somehow.
Yeah.
Is it possible that the reason is that both groups, progressive or more conservative, no longer pay any attention whatsoever to the teaching of the bishops unless the teaching of the bishops on a particular issue happens to agree with what they think anyway?
Yeah.
And would that be connected in any way to what I would consider to be the failure of the bishops to be moral teachers?
Wow. Okay. Thank you, first of all, for the shout out of on behalf of the sisters. You're absolutely right. They have been doing this synodal process without being called synodality. So without a doubt, when we look at polls, and statistics about how Catholics voted, what we know is that, say, 60% of white Catholics, particularly, voted for Donald Trump. 40% for Kamala Harris. But what we don't know is how many. You see, it could be 60% of 1 million. It could be 60% of 20 million. Those numbers, it's gonna take a lot of speculation and so on. So, but the one thing that I find freeing, and at least hopeful, is that there are 72 million Catholics in the United States of America, and it's quite likely that not half of them were supporting of this, or the other half were supporting of that, So that gives us a little sense of hope. Sociologically speaking, sociologists who are looking at questions of polarization estimate that about 10% of the population self-identify with the French right, and 10% of the population self-identify with the French left. Okay, so we got that 20%, which most likely I would agree with your assessment. They will be people who, regardless of what the Pope or the bishops or say, they already made up their minds about ideology, about their positions and their convictions. So and also the fringes. I don't use the word fringes pejoratively. It's just simply the extreme, right and extreme left. So they tend to be more militant about their issues. They are the people who write books, the people who write articles in media, they have podcasts, they are actively promoting their message. The potential is always that 80%, the middle, And that is what sometimes, we find many of our Catholics in the pews, who are there, or Catholics who are perhaps simply tired of the polarization. They are tired of hearing messages that are not balanced, and they became disengaged. They became disengaged in the church. They became disengaged in politics. They became disengaged in the affairs of the state, And I think that's the potential that we have as evangelizers, as educators. How do we reach to those in the middle? And the number is large. The number is large, So again, the hope is that polarization is not as bad as it looks. It is just the fringes are noisier. So those are some initial reflections. Thank you.
I have one last question from a student in the back here.
Hi, my name is Jocelyn, and I want to refer back to the beginning of what you were talking about, and how with the Catholic identities, do you believe that over time is going to change, especially when it comes to Catholic people wanting Catholic to embrace gender more?
Gender?
Yes.
Gender differences?
Yes, gender differences.
I think so. I think so. I mean, on that question, I believe that there is lots of room for change. I mean, we come from decades of popes chiding away from conversations about LGBTQ people. Today, we have a pope who says, "Let's talk about it." You know, so that it can change. You know, the Catholic Church as a community has changed its approach to questions like slavery, you know, the role of women in the church. There used to be a time when, as a matter of fact, it's interesting, you know, public education. There used to be a time when the Catholic Church said, no, only the church can educate Catholics, you know. Today, we are one of the biggest advocates of quality public education. We need to be. So there is change, there is room for change. And on the questions of gender identity, the questions of how do we support one another, you know, in terms of our embodied experience, I am hopeful that we will grow more, and that's the hope. Thank you.
On that very hopeful note, I'm going to say thank you so much for coming tonight. This is the last lecture in the fall series, and I think that we've ended it well. I really appreciate you being here. And please feel free to take a snack or stay and talk to one another as we end. Thank you. Good night.
Thank you.